I have heard it once said that Paul Morphy was the greatest chess player during his time in comparison to his contemporaries. At least he was considered to be one of the greatest players of the 19th century. He was known for his aggressive and attacking style of play. And yes, his brilliance and imaginative play widely recognized. And often he was regarded as one of the first true chess masters. But the question is all of this true according to modern grandmasters? Well, first you must understand that back in past times, chess theory was in its development stage, and there were no chess engines or computers. However, according to modern standards, if you did use a computer to check the games of Paul Morphy against the moves of modern masters, you will then see that modern players would fare much better. Then, again, wouldn't it be more fair to make an assessment by separating skill from talent? Hold that thought. Another point I want to make is that although there were moves made that wouldn't be considered the most accurate per se, but the moves were strong enough to defeat his competitors of the day. Well, in this video, that is exactly what we're going to do. Travel back in time in the time machine and analyze the games of the great Paul Charles Morphy and match them with the games of modern masters. So hold on to your seats. We are about to take a trip to the chess world back in the 1800s. Okay, this is the game between Paul Morphy and Martin St. Leon that took place in Paris in 1863. So Morphy was playing the white pieces, but he was giving knight odds. The queen's knight was removed from the board. So the moves were e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, the king's gambit. So e4, e5, f4, ef, knight f3, and g5. Bishop c4 was played in the game, and g4. Now, according to my research, none of the moves d4, knight c3, bishop takes f7 check, castle king side, or even knight from f to e5 offer even a decently playable position for white with chances to play for a win in a complicated position, at least not to my knowledge. So let's look at the moves. d4 was the move played in the game. But let's take a look at d4 first. Now this is met by g takes f3, and if queen takes f3, then d5, bishop takes d5, And after c6, white is forced to do either of two things. One, make another unsound sacrifice with moves such as bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, queen takes f4 check, and king e8. And white is able to defend this with queen e7. Then the other move is bishop to b3, when black can capture on d4. And let's look at castling here. If white castles, then after d5, this opens up the e file, because after bishop takes d5, then bishop to g4 is bad for white. Another move is knight e5, and knight e5 is refuted by queen h4 check. And after king f1, knight c6, knight takes f7. Then black has b5, and after bishop b3, pawn to f3. Black also has pawn to f3 right away. Then there's bishop takes f7 check. Now this is known to be dubious, since after king takes f7, knight e5 check, king drops back to e8, queen takes g4. Then black gains tempo with knight f6, and after queen takes f4, d6, and white is forced to retreat. Although white does have two pawns, some central activity, and has prevented black from castling, he does so at the cost of a piece, and is still a bit unsound.
And one final example before we get to the game.
Now taking the position back to white's fifth move, the other move after g4, move 4 by black, then white can castle. Now this move, the Muzio Gambit, is met by g takes f3, and after queen takes f3, queen f6, when there are many unsound variations.
Now let's get to the game.
So in the game, e4, e5, f4, e takes f4, knight f3, g5, bishop c4, g4, d4 was played. G takes f3, queen takes f3 was played. Black didn't play d5, but the move that black played was bishop to h6. So bishop h6 was played. Engine check. Queen h4 checked. g3, queen e7. Castle. and knight c6 hitting the d4 pawn. And two replies by white. Two main moves are queen c3 and queen d3. Taking a look at queen c3 first. Queen c3, bishop g7, and e5. d6, rook takes f4, knight h6 to guard the f7 square. You have the rook on f4 and the bishop on c4 hitting on f7. So knight to h6, e takes d, c takes d, and now queen d3. Castle. c3, bishop e6. The move is bishop to d2, but if pawn to d5, thinking that you're going to get a fork, then the answer is knight on c6 to e5, which hits the queen and the bishop. So bishop to d2, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and queen d7. Now taking it back. In this position, e5 was played. Now taking a look at queen d3. So after queen h4, g3, queen e7, white castles, knight c6 hitting d4, queen c3 was queen to c3 was played, followed by bishop to g7. Now we're going to take a look at queen to d3. Knight a5 hitting the bishop on c4, bishop d5, knight c6, bishop takes f4, bishop to g7, c3, d6, rook f2, bishop d7, bishop d2, knight d8 covers the f7 square, b4, h5, rook to e1, bishop e6, h6 was played instead of queen h4 check. So after bishop h6, the game continued. Castle, queen f6, e5 hitting the queen. In the game, queen to g7 was played. Engine check. Queen b6 attacks both the d4 pawn and it pressures the b2 pawn at the same time. So that if bishop on c1 were to move, then b2 would be weak like the d pawn is. Queen b6, and the line goes queen e4, knight c6, c3, knight d8, again covering the f7 square, bishop takes f4, queen takes b2, queen to e3 and pawn to b5, rook on a to b1, queen c2, e6, knight takes e6, bishop takes h6, and why didn't black capture the bishop on h6 and chose to play the bishop to b7? Let's take a look. This is an in-between move. Now let's look at some things here. The bishop on c4 is already hanging. See the pawn on b5, and this knight on g8 is hitting this bishop, but by playing the bishop to b7 is aiming at the pawn on g2 along with the queen on c2. So this pawn is under attack. By the bishop and the queen threatening checkmate on g2. So, taking it back. So queen b6 was a move to consider, but the move played was queen to g7, and the game continued. Bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4, queen takes f4. Now there is pressure on f7 now, more pressure. The bishop on c4, queen on f4, and the rook along with the queen, the battery on the f file. So the move here the black played was knight to h6 and now rook to f3, threatening to swing the rook over with the idea of playing the rook over to g3. Now rook g8 was played. But knight c6 is another move to look at here. But anyway, rook f3, rook g8, rook g3, queen f8. Rook takes g8, knight takes g8, and rook f1, knight h6. Now g4 was played. For some reason the engine doesn't like this move. It says that perhaps queen h4 was the better move. But anyway, g4 was played and the game continued with d6. The engine says that more effective was knight to c6, and then after g5, queen g7, queen to f6 in a trade of queens, knight to g8, bishop takes f7, check, king f8, rook f1, king g7, followed by c3, knight d8, bishop e8, and a5, with the idea of opening up the rook on a8 here. And h4, rook a6, rook f2, knight e7, and black's pieces slowly untangle and is ready to advance the d pawn to d5. Bishop h5, pawn to d5. Okay, so the move that Morphy played was the pawn to g4, although the engine likes queen h4. But anyway, after g4, the game continued with pawn to d6. Again, knight c6 was more effective. But anyway, continuing after d6, Morphy played the pawn to e6. Now, the engine gave it 2 question marks. The move very much recommended by the engine is pawn takes d6. Now, taking on d6 exposes, for the main part, it exposes the king on e8. The e file is wide open and was probably better, much better. But in the game, played the pawn to e6, and the move played here was pawn to f6. Now, this was considered a little dubious. Queen g7. Queen g7, for example. Pawn takes f7 check, king f8. And after white protects the g pawn, knight to c6, c3, knight to e7, king h2, bishop to d7, b4, bishop c6, pawn to g5, queen to g6. Now keep in mind that this pawn cannot take the knight on h6. Let me take a couple of moves back. The bishop is developed. There's an X-ray. There is an X-ray of the queen to g2. Right there. The bishop is on c6 and the queen is on g7. So queen to g6 and the pawn cannot take, or it's checkmate on g2. So the move that white would play in this position most likely would be the pawn to d5. Knight captures, threatening the queen on f4. And after bishop, then bishop takes d5. The threat is renewed. Now the threat here, I guess, is queen coming here, going there, at least going to cause some discomfort. A little bit. I don't see much. Maybe with the idea of queen going there, king steps out here, and then queen takes the rook over there. Maybe that's what it is. But anyway, knight to f5. Queen takes bishop. Knight to e3. Now the knight forks both the rook and the queen. Queen takes b7, threatening the rook on a8. Knight takes f1 with check. King g1. Rook d8. Queen takes c7. Queen takes g5, which not only checks the king but also defends the rook on d8. King takes f1. Again, queen f6 checks the king and also defends the rook on d8. King g1, h5, queen a2, queen c3, b5, queen g3, king f1, check, and so forth. And the only thing I can see black doing at this point is perhaps getting in a position to where he'll be able to checkmate the king on e1, possibly swinging the rook over here to c8 with the idea of going here, I don't know, maybe here with the queen. Another idea is to advance this pawn, check the king here, try to get this pawn marching up board. You know, ideas such as that. And then if these pawns won't, any of these pawns won't be a problem, which I don't think they will be, then I mean, to me it's just easily won for black. So let's take it back. So d6, Morphy played e6, f6 was played, g5, queen g7, queen takes f6, queen takes, rook takes, knight g8, rook f7, and this move is a blunder. But the move suggested here is knight to c6. Why knight c6? Let's see. After knight c6, rook takes h7, knight on c to e7. Okay, so this knight blockades the pawn on e6. And after d5, c6. Bishop to e2, knight takes, bishop check, king d8, rook f7, knight on g to e7, pawn to c4, knight e3, king f2, knight takes c4, rook f8 check, king c7, rook f7. So I don't know, I guess I see black going back here maybe a couple times and it's probably going to end up taking this pawn at some point. This knight is already hitting the b2 pawn. The knight can also go to e5, controlling these squares. And once this bishop moves, then this rook can be moved along the 8th rank to one of these files. So taking it back, and the game c6 was played, and the game continued. Rook g7, knight e7, rook takes h7, king to d8 was played. Rook h8 check, king to c7, and rook to e8 was played. And at this point, I think black conceded the game to white. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for my next video. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.